Okay, so I'm here with right-wing extremist Richard Hanania, and we're going to be talking about Trump versus Harris. So I'm on Team Harris. I think it's important that we stand with Black women. Richard obviously
I agree with that. No, of course, that's one of the best reasons to be with Kamala.
Yeah. So I guess, do you want to just start by laying out, okay, why not vote for Harris? And then I'll give like a two-ish minute spiel, and I'll give a two-ish minute spiel.
I don't know. I have a kind of libertarian sort of hostility to voting. So I usually don't say who I'm going to vote for because sometimes I don't even end up voting, even though here in California, they send us the ballots in the mail and make it easy as possible. I usually can't find the enthusiasm to do it. Although I will sometimes, like during COVID, when there was a county supervisor here who was against mask mandates and others who were not against mask mandates, and in like case like that, I'll vote. And then for on the ballot initiatives, I'll tend to vote on those when on most of them where I have an opinion. But yeah, the way I framed my article was I hope that Republicans win in 2024, and that means the presidency, that means the Senate, that means the House of Representatives. And the argument is that basically economic freedom is very important. I think I underplay, and I think that free market policies are better for economic freedom and better for economic growth. I downplayed the freedom angle a little bit, and I said there's not really that much difference between the parties. That's true, but I should have probably clarified a little bit that on free speech issues and on things like campus climate, there's actually a lot that the federal government can do through civil rights law, and a lot the federal government has done. And then, there's free speech issues, which I think in an academic environment are very important. I don't believe, like some right-wing people do, that Democrats are going to start locking people up for speech or anything like that anytime soon. And in my piece, I talk about some of the arguments against Trump, that he's, crazy. He doesn't accept democracy. He's an unstable character. All true, even more than Trump's detractors tend to think. I mean, if anything, so a lot of them underplay it. But I don't think he's going to be in a position to steal this election. Like when he tried to steal the last election, he ended up not being able to, despite having the presidency. He's gonna lie about this election too. If he loses, he's going to probably be the Republican nominee in 2028. By the way. In which case, if you want to get rid of him, he probably should win this time too. That's another good reason to vote for Trump. And so look, there's a reason America is a wealthy country. There's a reason America is that much wealthier than Europe and so that much more innovative. And there's a reason that the Republican states, as I've written about, have done so much better than Democratic states over the last 40 years. And these policies, which will not all make the news, which will not all make headlines, which you won't hear about that much, if at all. There's going to be people that the president appoints. There's going to be judicial branch nominees. There's going to be judges who are going to be there for, in some cases, 10, 20, 30 years. And there are going to be, of course, regulators over the course of Trump's presidency. And in general, the Republican regulators and judges will make better decisions, from my perspective, on that front than the Democratic appointees, judges, and officials will. And so that, in a nutshell, it's not the easiest decision in the world. It's not, 99-1. I don't think people who support Kamala Harris are crazy based on their value system, and even people who share my value system and my general outlook on the world, who end up coming to a different conclusion. I respect that. I think it's I'm not a big fan of the Republican Party where they are today, but whatever. Election year, you want my opinion?
Yeah. So So I think there are sort of four primary reasons why I support Harris. One of them is, I think, the thing you were talking about that was a point in favor of Harris. Harris is just a generally more competent person than Trump. I expect that the people that she appoints into the federal government are less likely to be sort of corrupt, incompetent bureaucrats, and more likely to be people who are sort of smart and good at regulating and passing laws. She did not, unlike Trump, she didn't try to overturn the results of a free and fair election. Well, I think Trump is unlikely to, like in 2024, seriously try to overturn the results of the election. I think the fact that he's the sort of person who did make, quite an absurdly undemocratic effort to overturn the results of the election says something fairly alarming about what it would be like to have him as president. I'd say maybe like 5 to 10% chance that he makes a major push to become a dictator, and that's fairly alarming. The second area on which I think Harris is better is and this is going to sound sort of obscure, but I think it's quite an important issue. There's a federal program known as the PEPFAR program, and the PEPFAR program was passed under George H.W. Bush. Since it was implemented, it saved about 25 million lives. It provides anti-HIV treatment, mostly in Africa. The Republicans support cutting the PEPFAR program. One estimate found that even a 20% cut to PEPFAR would cost about 300,000 lives. And so, you don't hear very much about the program, but it's a big enough program. It's like prevents, 2 Iraq wars worth of death per year. Right. So I think, that's a pretty big issue, right? That the Republicans want to cut it, that Trump generally wants to cut foreign aid, and that the Republicans had some totally bogus story about how it was being used to fund abortion, and that they used that to justify PEPFAR cuts. The Trump budget.
Did Trump cut PEPFAR, and did it cause deaths, as far as we know, during his first administration?
Trump didn't cut PEPFAR. Various federal Trump budgets included less for PEPFAR, that those budgets didn't go through. And the Republicans under Biden made a concerted effort to cut PEPFAR after there was a piece published by the Heritage Foundation that so had there been Trump in charge, it likely would have cut PEPFAR. I guess the third point is on animal welfare. I think, Richard and I agree that, the fact that we basically, torture and kill almost 100 billion animals every year, just land animals, trillions of sea creatures. We lock them in these tiny cages where they're unable to turn around, where they're lying in feces and ammonia all the time. I think that the fact that that's like so much worse than everything else in the world. It's maybe causes every few years more suffering than has ever existed in the history of the world. That's a really serious issue. I think the Democrats are better. They tend to appoint administrators who crack down more on, who have more stringent interpretations of animal welfare laws. They're more likely to fund lab-grown meat and less likely to ban lab-grown meat, as various Republican governors have. And then the final point is, I think that the Democratic administrations are more likely that a Harris administration is going to be better on existential threats, on working to, on the threats that really threaten the world in the 21st century, threats from AI, threats from biotech risk. In order to combat those, you need some sort of global cooperation. And the fact that Trump pulled out of various different arms control treaties is constitutionally averse to ever cooperating with other countries or signing a deal makes it very alarming to have him at the helm negotiating with other countries. So that's my case for Harris. I think Harris should include all these in her ads, like Trump, rights, bad on PEPFAR, bad for America.
Yeah. The PEPFAR, I don't know. I'm skeptical that foreign aid, I haven't looked into this, that goes this far, or that it's spent so effectively that you can cut 10 to 20% and it's going to have this major influence. Maybe it's true. People can look into it. I wonder, how much longer the U.S. is going to have to protect Africa from AIDS. I mean, I think that's something that's been going on for 20 years now, and I think AIDS has gotten control a little bit. I would be surprised if the exact same program is still necessary. Something that started in the Bush administration today, and if that's the case, then we should think about why that is. As far as the animal rights thing, you talked about this, that this is something that the federal government can do something on. You're right. If I was voting on animal rights, I would want less economic growth. You know what? A better case against, from an animal rights perspective for Harris is she'll have lower economic growth and people will eat less meat and there will be less animal suffering. I mean, I think that if you start worrying about utilitarian calculations of animals, I think you get into some strange places. I think you want an economic collapse. I think you want war. I mean, I think
what's the reason to think that?
Well, because you'd have if you have a world war that kills hundreds of millions of people, you will, a lot of chickens and cows and shrimp and such will be saved. Right? If you have a little more economic growth, meat is expensive relative to other kinds of food, and people will eat less. So,
I mean that's true. I think. I mean, So if you wiped out the entire world or something, right? That would reduce. But I think if you suppose you got into a big war, that might set us back technologically for a while. But I don't think it would, in the long run, decrease the number of animals. Given that I think that the long run solution to to factory farming is going to come through lab grown meat. Right? That's the only way it'll ever get phased out on a major scale, and that requires to have a functional economy where we're capable of innovating and the government is efficient and productive.
Yeah, and this goes back to the economic growth thing, because you're going to probably hurt more animals in the short run because people are going to eat. I mean, especially global growth. Maybe not an American growth. Maybe Americans get richer. They don't need more because they're already eating themselves to death and they're already satiated. Right? They have all the food they could eat. But you would have implications for global global economic growth, you might want the person who is worse for the global economy, so the third world doesn't eat so much meat. It's bad. You'd say, well, utilitarian. It's bad that these people stay poor, but it's good for the animals, right? I think there's a sort of a direct conflict between. Now, I want to get out of this conflict, right? But there's a direct conflict between human well-being and animal well-being, given the fact that we are meat eaters.
I mean, look, I think it'll come down to how much you value. Well, first of all, I actually think and this is sort of an even more 4D underwater chess animal welfare thing. But I think that humans have had a positive impact on wild animal suffering that dwarfs the effect on farmed animals.
Oh.
We've made there be way fewer wild animals.
We've killed them all.
Well, we've made it so that their habitats are smaller, right? So we've also killed a bunch of them.
Yeah.
But right. So and I think wild animals live very shitty lives. And so right. So okay. So there's the 4D underwater. Math. The math gets very complicated with. But I think there's a straightforward case that look, the Republicans are in favor of banning the best hope for getting rid of factory farming and of less stringent enforcement on animal welfare laws. A lot of the other stuff related to animal welfare about the net impact from economic growth, all this stuff's very unclear, but I think, we don't want the guys who support, many of whom support making it illegal to produce alternatives to animal welfare.
There's two things, though. So there's two things countervailing forces here. A richer country is going to have more money to invest in all kinds of technology that will include lab-grown meat. So if we accept the premise that Republicans are better for economic growth, not all people will agree with that premise, but that's my belief. Then you can maybe make the day come faster, right? Where you have lab-grown meat that replaces factory farmed meat. On the other hand, you say, well, if they ban the technology, yes, that's a problem. Now,
or cut federal funding for it.
Well, how much? Is there any federal funding? Is Harris proposing federal funding?
There's currently a little bit of federal funding. They're not very much, right? But I think the odds of there being some under a Harris administration are better than the odds under a Trump administration.
Probably, but I don't know how you would fund it. I mean, I don't like things just aren't funded just because they're generally good things. Usually, they fall under some kind of category that government funds.
Yeah, that's true. Right. I think the potential ban.
But I don't think there's going to be a ban. But I don't think that what we're getting to is I don't think there's going to be a ban. There could be something that could put regulatory hurdles in the way, maybe. But a ban is requires legislation, and it would require a filibuster-proof majority. Is there something the executive branch could do to make it harder? Maybe. I'd encourage you to look into this as animal rights guy and write something about this, because it's a question that we could be good to have real answers to.
Yeah, there was an article by Wayne Seung, I think is his name, where he wrote about sort of which candidate is better on animal welfare, and he looked at sort of he compared the way that the Trump administration had enforced certain animal welfare laws, like the Humane Slaughter Act. They were much more permissive in their enforcement of it.
That's legitimate. It's a legitimate reason to support Kamala. I can use animal rights as a tiebreaker, animal well-being as a tiebreaker, but if I start to balance animal welfare against human welfare, I get to strange places. I get to places where we should destroy humanity. That's where I get, and I don't want to go down that path.
Yeah, well, right. So I mean, clearly there are some cases where you measure animal welfare against human welfare.
Yeah,
right?
It would be. No, I would, but I would not. It'd be a tiebreaker. It'd be one thing.
But I think that I can see how if you're comparing lots of human deaths to lots of animal deaths, right? That then that would be significant. But in this case, what we're comparing is if you're right about the economy, which of course I disagree about, then we're comparing, a little bit less GDP growth to huge numbers of animals being tortured for their entire lives and killed.
The GDP growth is cumulative, right? And it's a long-term thing.
That's true.
And so, the question is, does that get us? I think it just gets us to I think we become more humane. I think we reflect more when we're wealthier. I think that's basically the general trend of humanity. I see the Taliban banning women in public spaces. I think Afghanistan, if it grew economically, I think it would probably be the best path to, to them changing their culture in a positive direction. That's generally how it's worked most of the world. And I think we become more humane in that way. So,
yeah, I mean, I certainly agree. Right. I'm in favor of economic growth. I think that if you had, but I care a lot more about economic growth in the lab-grown meat sector, right, than I do about economic growth in other sectors, and I think the Democrats will be better there. I agree. right, if you think the Republicans are way better on the economy, maybe that they'd be better for lab grown wheat. But I think there's at least some consideration in favor of Harris.
And
I
agree.
I mean, I think you and I would disagree about exactly how big the consideration is, but I think I think it's a decent consideration. I guess we could talk about the economy because that's one area where we disagree. I mean, one thing is just so I expect Harris to be better on the economy than Trump. One fact is just the economy grows more under Democrats than under Republicans. The last 5 times you've gone from a Republican administration to a Democratic administration, GDP growth has gone up. The last 5 times you've gone from a
well, I mean, okay, so it was during COVID. Right, the last Republican administration during COVID, so you had like this massive drop, and then you had this massive spike in every country in the world. I mean, these are small sample sizes, and there's a lot going on.
Yeah, right. I mean, but you look at the last 5 times, and in both cases, right? In both cases, Republican to Democrat it goes down, or sorry, it goes up. Democrat to Republican it goes down. I agree. Okay, it might be a coincidence. It's not completely dispositive, but it's at least something. I'm very skeptical of our ability to forecast. From the armchair, just by sort of considering, as you rightly note, administrations do huge numbers of things, appoint huge numbers of people to the federal bureaucracy. So I'm more willing to just trust. Okay, who's better for the economy, just as an empirical matter, right? Maybe maybe it's a coincidence, but I would place more trust in that than trying to figure out ideologically who we would expect to be better for the economy.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is that even if you accept the data set of 5 or whatever it
10.
is. 5, 10. I mean, look, yeah, even if you accept that, I mean, the parties change over time, right? So the Democrats have been moving to the left on economic issues. Bill Clinton's positions are not Barack Obama's, and are not Joe Biden's, and are not Kamala Harris's. And so you're right. We can't precisely measure the impact of every single policy. We just have to have a theory about how the world works.
Yeah, right.
And I have a theory about how the world works that takes the totality of human history and a lot of cross-national data and economic theory, and one that says low levels of regulation and taxation are better than higher levels of regulation and higher levels of taxation, right? And so one thing for sure that Republicans will do, as far as these things can be, is that they'll extend the tax cuts, the Trump tax cuts, which are going to be expiring during the next administration, and corporate tax rate. They want the corporate tax rate to stay low or go lower, right? So that's one simple thing. On entitlements, which are going to break the budget, right? I don't think anyone thinks that best rate of economic growth is just to become a welfare state for old people and just take money out of people in their productive years and just funnel them to the old in less than a decade. There's going to be a crisis with Social Security and Medicare. Trump is bad on this. I mean, he says, I'm not going to cut this, but Republicans are, Democrats are still the party that are going to be more likely to probably favor tax increases rather than benefit cuts in order to balance the books, right? And so we have these ideas. I mean, the economy is very it's very sort of it is cyclical. I mean, these idea that the guy comes in and I mean, you had the COVID, which was you can't count that. I mean, you had Trump, you had a great economy up until COVID. You can't really blame him for that as far as the economic growth, and then Biden picks back up. Then you had with Bush, you had the recession. You had that decades in the making. Now the first Bush, you had a recession, but the reason he doesn't win and the reason the Democrat comes in, is because is because the economy was bad, right? So the economy was bad, and that's the reason you got a Democratic president in the first place. And so, but here's the bigger picture is you've also had Republicans control the White House for a really long time. I think from 68 till about 2008, all but 16 years, if I'm right, all but 20 years of that. There was all but 12 years from 68 to 2008. Republicans were in the White House, and the Americans' economy did absolutely great. Bill Clinton, I mean, was a right-wing president. I mean, for a Democrat, he had a Republican Congress. He balanced the budget. He did a lot of conservative things. I mean, Bill Clinton had a great economy. He did a lot of things. He did. A lot of his positions would have been unthinkable today in the Democratic Party.
And so, yeah, that's that's the case. I think there's a better case. I mean, there's the macroeconomic stuff. There's the Fed independence, which people
Yeah,
have brought
right.
up to me.
Yeah,
And that's something to worry about.
yeah. I mean, I think right. So it's true that you can look at years where the economy did well under Republicans, but on average, it does better under Democrats, and when you switch, right? So I think that's at least something in favor of it being better under Democrats. I think that I think Trump is in various ways very bad on the economy. Trump, he supports a 10% tariff across the board. He supports immigration restrictions. Immigrants are responsible for about half of is appreciably worse on the economy. Or sorry, I don't think Trump is appreciably better on the economy, given that he supports tariffs, he supports immigration restrictions. Those are both things that he has more control over. He supports limiting the independence of the Federal Reserve. The last point is I'm less ideologically libertarian than you are, so I'm less confident that a more libertarian federal administration is going to be better, right? So a Trump administration would appoint people who are more averse to regulations, but I don't think that the sole determinant of how good a president is how many regulations that they do. I think we want, when it comes to, for example, the EPA. Maybe, I think a lot of the regulations are good things, if they ban certain harmful chemicals. I think what determines, the Democrats are the more competent party and the Republicans are the more libertarian party. But I think in a lot of these, a lot of these administrative positions, I think it matters more having competent people than having libertarian people, where they have to make these sort of complicated decisions that depend on all these difficult value judgments about certain types of chemicals and so on. So,
the competence thing, I mean, it depends on, I think that it's very dependent on ideology, how much competence you actually want. I mean, a lot of Democrats have values that are just anti-growth. A lot of them have values that say we want economic equality, we want paternalism, we want to equalize outcomes between groups. And if someone is competent in the pursuit of these things that I think are destructive to freedom and destructive to progress, then we don't necessarily want that. I want a incompetent Lena Khan. I want an incompetent FTC if they're taking this hostile attitude towards commerce, right? And so, yeah, I mean, that's the competence thing. I think there are, I don't know, like how much the Democratic competence. I mean, yes, they're more competent in the sense that they're just less likely to have people who are complete bozos, right?
Yeah.
The president doesn't appoint that many people. I mean, the president only appoints a few thousand people. It's a lot of judges, and there's enough smart conservative judges and regulators to put in the positions basically for everyone that the president will have to appoint. Now, the trade and immigration things. Yes, these are major costs. How much Trump will restrict immigration, we'll see. His instincts are actually much better than those around him, but those around him just dislike immigration in general. I don't think we'll get 10% tariffs. He didn't do anything close to that in his first administration. And a lot of the protectionism against China that was kept on by the Biden administration, and the Biden administration has not been exactly pushing free trade anymore. The Trans-Pacific Partnership that was under Obama, Hillary Clinton abandoned it when she was running in 2016. All the other countries besides the United States and the pact signed it, and then Biden made no effort to bring it back. So the Democrats are also turning in an anti-trade direction. The immigration thing is big. I mean, you undersell it. It's just not the numbers that are great. I mean, you go higher, just like number of businesses started by immigrants, right? But then you look at like Fortune 500, and you look at you brought up Penn's, and like the higher the sort of level of accomplishment, the more overrepresented immigrants will be. Probably I think that probably Republicans will probably restrict more of the less talented migration. But I think they probably get a lot of the high skilled immigrants who are potentially going to contribute a lot are probably going to get caught in that net. It's a problem. It's a problem with the Republicans.
Yeah, I agree. Democrats are obviously not ideal on trade, and I think that the fact that Biden didn't reverse the tariff that Trump imposed is quite alarming. Though I think, like, you agree, right? The Republicans are worse on this issue.
On trade, yes, maybe. when Trump did the new NAFTA deal, it was Democrats who wanted all these labor provisions and all that. So I don't know. It's actually a complicated question. Now, Trump himself is probably worse than anybody, and JD Vance, they're probably worse. So yes, in this case, yes.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, under the Biden administration, he didn't get rid of the Trump tariffs, but he didn't impose new ones. I didn't think. Did he impose them? I don't know.
Yeah, I think there was some stuff around semiconductors and stuff.
Yeah, but Trump got into a quite a bit more substantial.
But he's so superficial and so stupid. Like, you know, he tore up NAFTA and then had a new deal that was pretty much the same thing. Like, it's very hard to find an analysis that says it's much different.
Right. So with Mexico and with North America, right? You know, what he did was got rid of NAFTA and then adopted NAFTA. Yeah. But when it comes to China, you know, he got into the trade war, which I was reading some estimates. They said it maybe reduced the GDP by maybe 1 percentage point or something. Biden didn't do anything like that. And I think trade is especially important if you're sort of, if you're concerned about other countries, right? If you think that, it's actually really important that the third world becomes wealthier, then, having the United States trade with other countries, that's very valuable for that. I agree. I agree with what you're saying about immigration. I think maybe like the single issue that is most important for economic growth for a president to get right is immigration, and that happens to be the issue on which, like, Trump is the worst, maybe like maybe the worst of any candidate in the last 60 years or something. Mm-hmm. And it's also, it's also just a severe restriction on liberty, right? If you're sort of a libertarian, having the government pass a law that forces people at gunpoint to live in shitty countries like Mexico is not, masking's bad, right? I'm against, but being forced to live in Mexico, that's a way more significant rights violation. And, it affects hundreds of thousands of people, makes it so that their kids have to remain in Mexico, right? Mexicans give birth to children who live in Mexico and so on. So, I think immigration is an important enough issue that it might be enough by itself to reverse the point about a more libertarian administration.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. I calculated how many people are plausibly less people are gonna come in a Republican administration compared to a Democratic administration. It's substantial. It's in the hundreds of thousands. So yeah, there's a good argument for it.
Yeah. I mean, and this is sort of how I feel. So, Bible scholars, they have this adage where you interpret the unclear in the light of the clear. You start with what's really obvious, and then you sort of get to, you evaluate the non-obvious stuff later. And my view is sort of I think that Trump is a sort of unstable, crazy person who's deeply incompetent and deeply xenophobic, opposed to really, really anti-free market when it has to do with anything relating to other countries. I think the fact that Trump is like that, that's really clear, right? It's really clear he's going to be bad. And then in terms of the stuff about, okay, what will his net impact on economic growth be? I think that's much less clear, right? I find it very non-obvious which candidate's going to be better for the economy. So I think, a candidate who's more competent, who's not undemocratic, who's less likely to cut PEPFAR, who's better on it, all these things are cases on which I think it's really clear that Harris is better. So I think an issue as messy as the economy, where you have a lot of different factors that go into it, that's something that I wouldn't want to have my vote be decided based on.
I mean, I can point out some things that Republicans will be clearly better on. We've mentioned universities, academic freedom. I think a lot of people are getting in trouble, even they're not even able to research the genetics of fatness. I don't know if you know this, but there was this guy at the University of Minnesota who wrote he couldn't even get the data. You can't, forget about intelligence. You want to look into the genetics of these different things, like these regulatory agencies. The National Institute of Health will say that's unethical. You can't have the data, or you can't be funded, or whatever. Free speech. I think universities are driving out a lot of smart people who just can't be as conformist as they would like them to be these days. Republicans on civil rights law are going to be better in that direction. So there's some things that I will say Republicans are, unquestionably better on. I think they're better on taxes. I think we're taxed too much. I don't think we're, I think the optimal size of government is much lower than we have now. And certainty, I'm pretty certain. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, you have something like Operation Warp Speed. You have things like FDA reform. I mean, that's a big one. The Republicans are probably going to be more likely to do something that goes against the bureaucracy there. That's what happened to Operation Warp Speed, although they later denounced Operation Warp Speed, and all Republicans hate it because they're a very stupid party. But the point is the underlying principle of less regulation and government is in the way is correct.
Yeah.
Right? I'm confident of that.
Yeah, Operation Warp Speed was good. In terms of academic freedom, I find it much less obvious, where it's like, I think the Democratic Party has gotten a lot more extreme in response to Trumpism. I think if you had, if Trump had lost and like Jeb Bush had won, I think you'd have a lot less wokeness.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know. You have no free speech in any European country. Wherever liberals, in the West have power now, people tend not to have free speech.
So what are the specific policies that you think Harris administration would pass that would be worse on the free speech?
I think a lot of the regulations on, for example, what you can study or what you can't study, like I brought up, the genetics of obesity and IQ. I mean, these are just sort of it's not just the studies that go into this stuff, but just the overall academic freedom. And then you have, basically civil rights law. My book is about all of this, about how
should people buy your book?
People should buy the book. I would recommend it. And you'll see a lot of sort of the background of this, how the executive branch actually does determine a lot of these things, how a lot of sort of the hysteria over sexual assault and gender violence and all this stuff in universities came pretty directly from pressure from within the Obama administration. Kamala Harris, they probably won't replicate it in the exact same way, but they'll do something crazy. Likely, if history is any indication, they'll do something that's probably gonna make the environment a little bit crazier, a little bit more woke, a little bit more restrictive of free speech, and a little bit more hostile to people with unconventional views or just sort of nonconformist kind of demeanor. I mean, there was a guy. I think Eric Lander is his name, who was canceled from Biden's cancer moonshot thing because he made women cry because he yelled at some women, and there was this big report of Politico, and they got rid of him, and he's supposedly a very good guy for trying to solve cancer, and they got rid of him. I think he might have came back for some way, but anyways, this is something that happens on the left all the time. Now, there's also some things where the conservative bureaucrats could pressure them on free speech. I'm worried about the brain drain from academia. I mean, I'm worried that smart people tend not to go in there these days. I
mean, maybe that's a good thing, right? Maybe if academics or if the sort of smart nonconformist people are now working in industry and working on developing cancer cures rather than teaching undergraduates and writing useless philosophy papers. Maybe the world, I sort of want to go into philosophy academia, but maybe the world's a better place if people like me are priced out of philosophy.
I think people who are scientists, are good at knowing where they can have the biggest impact, right? And so I don't want to close the door for them and hope that they do something else, because I think that they're in best position to know what they can do. And some of these things can only be done in university, some of the fundamental research, right? A lot of money goes into that. So yeah, I don't know. I've talked to Roxandra about this, that, Nassim Nicholas Taleb, I think, has one of his books talks about how all the, important inventions come out of industry, and Roxandra says no, and other people have said no. Actually, a lot of fundamental stuff did come out of universities.
That Taleb guy seems kind of insane.
He is insane. Yeah, he blocked me a long time ago, but yeah, he's fun to listen to. He's fun to read, but crazy dude.
Yeah. I think. One thing is, I think the Democrats. I think it's not at all obvious who will be better on in terms of their impact on the academy. I mean, first, your claim is the Democrats are more likely to wokeify the academy. I think that's not clear. I mean, look, wokeness went up a lot under Trump, it looks like, and went down a lot in the last 4 years, right? It seems like we've passed peak woke, and now the Democrats are sort of distancing themselves from identity politics. Okay, maybe that's not caused by Trump, not having Trump.
I wrote about this in the tablet piece. A lot of it is because of Republican pressure. I mean, a lot of Republican states have gone and banned DEI and called these people into for hearings, and have really pressured sort of the universities at the state level. Is the Ivy League more or less woke? I don't know. Seems about the same.
That may be. I'm not the world leading expert on federal support for wokeness, right? So, but I don't know. It at least seems not obvious to me which candidate would be better on wokeness. I mean, one thing is the Democrats tend to be more supportive of funding public universities and of funding research. I'm inclined to think that that's a good thing, given that innovation is a public good. It's a sort of thing that you would expect to be underproduced in a competitive market, and so I think you want to have more researchers. I remember years ago when I was doing research for speech and debate, it just turns out the academia is just hugely consequential for a huge amount of medical research. Some huge share of new drugs have in large part to do with federal funding.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that the funding. I mean, I think that we need some new thinking on sort of the way things get funded. I think like what they did with Operation Warp Speed and the FDA. I mean, I think having regulations like that, thinking about ways that the system is broken, and this was right leaning economists and thinkers who were into something like Operation Warp Speed, right? Not the leftists for the most part.
Operation Warp Speed. That's a point in favor of Trump. I agree with that.
Yeah, it's a favor of sort of the conservative way of looking at the world, right? It's a strike against the federal bureaucracy, right? And people who are for the medical establishment and going along to get along and doing things the way they've always been done and just throwing money at problems. Right now, Operation Warp Speed, they're gonna not want to fund vaccines and stuff. So it's like a mess. I mean, these are terrible.
Right.
These are terrible.
Right. Yeah, I mean, right. I mean that now half the Republican Party has turned against funding vaccines because they're opposed to vaccines. I mean, I think that. well, it's good that Trump did Operation Warp Speed. It says something sort of alarming about it. That basically that's the thing that his party hates him for. That's the least popular thing among his people that he did.
Alarming. Alarming, a word I use a lot.
Yeah,
for about Republicans. Yeah.
And one question I'd have for you, Richard, in terms of things that are alarming, it does seem like nearly all smart people disagree with you. Like, if you just listen to what Scott Alexander thinks or what most of the sort of, intelligent heterodox people, it seems like nearly all of them are anti-Trump. Does that move you at all?
I'm pretty anti-Trump too.
Or sorry, when I said anti-Trump, I should have. I think Harris is the better candidate.
Do they all think? Yeah, I think they probably mostly do think that. But I don't think I'm not on a position that Trump is so obviously better, and anyone who believes in Harris is crazy. So if I this is a very complicated calculus where you're factoring in a lot of things, right? It's not the same. I would think differently if a bunch of people who are smart, I respected, had completely opposite views on all these substantive issues. But yeah, I talked to Jeff Meyer the other day, and that podcast will probably be out before this one is. And we agreed on a lot of stuff. We had a lot of shared reality. So whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. I don't think your position is outside the realm of things that reasonable people believe, certainly. But I think I'm sort of. I think you should.
I mean, I will say. I mean, you just talk about Substack writers,
we're the real experts.
The only people who. Yeah, I mean, I know smart people in my private life who I respect and support Trump. So, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I assume you'd agree. If you sort of take the average, smart person who thinks seriously about issues and has non-crazy views, most of them are voting for Harris. Most economists.
And a lot of them have a lot of other views that I would disagree with. Right. So that doesn't do a lot for me.
Yeah. There was something else I was going to say about. Oh, I mean, yeah. I don't remember what the other thing I was going to say was about that point. Yeah, I mean, I think. The other thing is, I sort of don't think that wokeness. I think the sensationalist stories where some person says something offensive and gets fired from a medical team. That's bad, but it's nowhere near in consequence as significant as say the potentially hundreds of thousands of lives that could be jeopardized by a cut to PEPFAR funding. And even that is not the biggest reason to vote for Harris.
I don't know. I mean, look, I think the frontiers of science and technology and knowledge are quite important. So I think you're making universities these kind of ideological monocultures of crazy people. No, I think it's pretty serious. Who knows how many lives it'll save in the long run? But I mean, it's bad.
But I mean, you have to consider right at the margin, how much of an ideological monoculture is it, right? And, I think I'd expect it to be an ideological monoculture under both Trump and Harris.
That's true.
Yeah, right. So I don't think it'll have, maybe if Trump, adopts your 16-point anti-wokeness plan, with laser-like efficiency, then maybe that would be a major point in favor of Trump. But Trump's this sort of bumbling, incompetent guy.
That's true, but they're going to appoint judges. They're going to appoint judges who are going to be interpreting all these laws, and they're going to be interpreting every free speech case and every case on affirmative action and all these other things, and that's gonna make a difference. It's the judges. I look at a presidential election, a victory, as sort of you're putting a bunch of money in a bank that's going to compound interest over time. That's what you're doing when you're appointing these judges. Right?
Yeah.
10, 15, 20 years down the line, they're going to make a decision. You're going to say, oh, that's because of the 2024 election, right? And so this is big for me.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the things that I pointed to, with the exception, no, actually, not with the exception, no exceptions. The things I pointed to, I think they also compound over time, right? The innovation in the lab meat industry, right? That compounds over time. Innovation builds on other innovation.
It's all growth. It's all economic growth.
Yeah, that's the people whose lives are saved.
It's all economic growth. That's how you get.
But I think certainly the effects on the economy of immigration, those especially
some things they're not all compound. Some things, they go back and forth, right? Some things like culture, wokeness, right? You go one direction, it's going to go the other direction. The economic growth thing is the thing that tends to compound, right?
I did it. The things I pointed to, right? Their effect on economic growth compounds over time, like immigration, right? Because immigrants are less productive than their kids, right? And so, having just more Americans to do innovation rather than people in Mexico, if we allow in a lot more immigrants, we'll have, way more innovation, way more economic productivity.
No, it's unfortunate Republicans are so xenophobic. So unfortunate.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, so I guess what do you mean? We're both really good cheerleaders for our party, my party is the sort of, the party that's very supportive of wokeness. But I don't know. I think I'm less down on Harris than you're down on Trump.
Maybe I'm just I don't know, negative on politicians. I don't know. Maybe
what we need is someone like RFK Jr. To shake things up. Yeah. What do you make of the point about existential risks? That Trump's less likely to appoint responsible decision makers. He's less likely, he pulled out of various arms control agreements. He's less likely to get some international treaty passed that has any comprehensive plan to work on, say, aligning AI or getting rid of all the scary things that EAs talk about things that might kill us all. It just seems like Trump's worse on all those things.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm becoming more skeptical of AI doom. So I'm just skeptical of that for various reasons. As far as war and arms control and stuff, look, that's the Trump during the Trump administration. I think in America that is sort of having a man who seems a little bit crazy is actually pretty good strategically. People laugh at the idea that maybe Hamas would not have attacked Israel. Or Putin wouldn't have invaded Ukraine if Trump was in office. People laugh at that and say, "How could he?" Well, to me, it's pretty easy to see how that would be the case because Hamas's entire strategy is to rely on the good graces of the American administration and to basically hide behind civilians and see a lot of them die. And then the American administration says, stop doing this, Israel. Who is in the White House and the orientation of the administration, I think, has a big impact on that. Same with Russia and Ukraine. I mean, the fact that he might do something crazy could make Putin think twice. Instead, we had Russia invade Ukraine and all the bad consequences of that. So I don't know. I don't know if necessarily Trump. I
don't know. I mean, I think so. I think that Trump. If your theory is we want someone a little with one screw loose, right? Because then he'll scare our enemies. I agree that there's there's something, something to like about it. People are less likely to mess with someone they think is kind of crazy, right? But there's also something not to like about it, which is you have the disadvantage that your guy's crazy, right? And so, Trump, he just randomly assassinates a high-level Iranian general. I think that the odds of a war with Iran are a lot higher under a Trump administration.
I don't think we have to. I don't think I don't think Iran is scary. I think it's a crazy amount of risk aversion that we're so afraid of pissing off Iran. I mean, we killed their general.
I guess I don't know how worried someone were. That's a topic I haven't read enough about. I don't think to have too much of an opinion. I mean, the thing that I think Trump is clearly worse on in regard. Well, I think a lot of things in regards to existential threats. One of them is Trump is just generally opposed to arms control treaties. We had various arms control agreements with Russia to reduce the size of the nuclear arsenals that Trump pulled out of. And I think that's especially alarming because the most likely way that a nuclear war starts is not that we fire nukes at Russia as part of some bellicose, war of aggression or anything, because mutually assured destruction works. The most likely scenario is that a nuclear war would start the way a nuclear war has almost started various times in the past, namely that there's some crisis and a sensor malfunctions and detects that there's a nuclear strike and some general fires it off. This has almost happened during the Cuban Missile Crisis. A bear tripped an alarm and we were about to launch a nuke and basically some guy had to drive a car to stop it at the last moment. there was the time when Arkhipov was, and their accounts differ, but he was, it looks like, making a decision under time pressure about whether to start to launch a nuclear weapon, because we were dropping depth charges on Arkhipov, and he was under sea, and there were 2 other generals, and all 3 of them had to approve a nuclear attack, and 2 of them did, right? So we've gotten really close, right? So I think what we want is just if the nuclear arsenal is a third smaller, that's roughly a third less chance of getting into well, not quite that, but that's a much less, a pretty sizable difference in the chance of getting into a nuclear war. And so I think the fact that Trump's against arms control agreements, that increases the probability of a nuclear war of some sort.
Yeah, I don't buy it. I don't think we've been that close to the nuclear war. I mean, we're close to somebody firing a nuclear war and maybe somebody responding to it. I think in the days of instantaneous communication, I think things like this are much likely, sort of surveillance, sort of satellites and universal sort of surveillance across the world, and instantaneous communication. You can text people and you can see, geolocated video and see what's going on in different parts of the world. And even if someone accidentally launches something, I mean, I think you could probably figure out pretty quickly it's an accident. Everyone would probably say, "Whoa, let's not do it."
I don't know. I mean, what do you think Putin would do if we accidentally launched a nuke at one of his cities?
Probably complain about it, and we'd say we're very sorry, and give him a bunch of money and feel guilty about it for a while. I don't think he would necessarily launch a nuke back. I mean, I think or maybe he would one, and then we'd be like, okay, it would be like this thing where with Iran and Israel, where they're sort of doing this thing where they symbolically. So he would nuke some uninhabited U.S. territory abroad and say, "I've nuked the United States." I
think that's possible. I'm not confident enough, and right, I think it's still, the greater risk is sort of alarming.
I mean, the potential risk is also the U.S. just looks like it's going to sort of withdraw. All these countries start fighting wars against each other. They start taking, matters into their own hands. The number of conflicts increases, and then wars, they tend to have a tendency to snowball, to lead to bigger conflicts.
Yeah. But I mean, the raw size of the U.S. nuclear arsenal, I don't think is the sort of thing that, I didn't think that has very much deterrence. If we can only, wipe out the Earth, 1.5 times over rather than 3 times over.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. I'm not against arms control. I don't know if it makes a chance of a nuclear war that much more likely. I mean, China was not even the thing. I mean, China's building a lot more nuclear weapons, and that's potentially an issue. But nobody, they weren't involved in the U.S.-Russia treaties. Right. I mean, you'd have to bring China in, and nobody's been doing that.
Yeah. I mean, they're obviously neither party is perfect on arms control agreements. It's not clear exactly how.
I think it's an existential. I mean, I think it's giving you too much credit to say this is an existential risk. I just think the odds of nuclear war are very, very low, and even a nuclear war, I think is survivable.
I think it's hard. Well, right. So I think probably we'd survive a nuclear war, and probably but still, I mean, a nuclear war, it would be really bad, and it might not be survivable. I've been at EA global conferences, and I've heard people give sort of superficially plausible explanations of how we might get into nuclear winter. You say you think the odds of nuclear war are very low. I think that's very hard to maintain. If people want to read more on this, I have an article called "Times the World Almost Burned," where we've been pretty frighteningly close. There was one time when there was a nuke that was flying over North Carolina, and it just malfunctioned and just dropped a nuke into North Carolina. There were 6 safety switches, and 5 of them failed. So, it was that one safety switch. Now, okay, probably if they dropped the nuke, probably we would have known that that was our fuck up. But it's just, I think this is at least I'm a long-termist, right? So I think what we care about is primarily how things will go in the long term. And I think that things that jeopardize the entire future are orders of magnitude more significant even than things in the short term, like economic growth and GDP, and Freudian slip, not avoiding a nuclear war is one of the things like that. I guess going back to the point about AI, I mean, I'm less of a doomer than a lot of EAs are. I don't think a lot of people say they're pretty confident that nuclear war will kill everyone. Okay, I think that's that AI will kill everyone. I think that's sort of crazy. But maybe 2% risk of ending the world. And if that's right, then the candidate who's better on managing the 1% risk of the end of the world, that's pretty significant. I mean, even a 1 in 10,000 chance of nuclear of the end of the world, that's 800,000 lives in expectation, even if we ignore all the future generations. So I think the candidate who's a bit better on AI and on emerging tech.
Yeah. So does somebody increase the probability of us all dying by 1 or 2% or so?
Well, I think it only has to be like 1 in 10,000. 1 in 10, an increase of 1 in 10,000 to be really significant.
If you go like that, I mean, you could say, I mean, it's I don't know. This is Pascal's mugging. You know this, right? Where you go.
Yeah.
You could say like, I want to be ruled by Fidel Castro because he's not going to have AI. And then if there's 1 in, he's going to decrease it by a lot, probably by 1% that the world's going over. Yeah, I think we just have to.
I mean, I don't think it's anything like Pascal's mugging, right? Pascal's mugging, that's about when it's a really, really low risk, like 1 in 10 trillion, and then you spike the expected value up to infinity. But I mean, a 1 in 1,000 chance or a 1 in a few thousand chance of ending the world, like, seems like, if you just multiply out, okay, what's 8 billion divided by 10,000? It's I think 800,000, right? So even if we if we think like that's the difference in existential risks, that's still just going to be like hugely significant.
Now, if Leopold Eschenbrenner was here, he would say perhaps the Democrats are more likely to restrict American AI and let the Chinese win. Right, and that's maybe that's not the end of humanity, but maybe we're all enslaved by the Chinese. Right, it's very hard. It's just very, very hard to say what increases by what. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's possible. I mean, I'm sort of inclined to think that the biggest risks of AI come from it being sort of misaligned, not in accordance with anyone's goals, such that I think it. Like I would think the Democrats are better. But the more important thing is like, okay, so there's this sort of ideological question of like, do you want more AI progress or less AI progress? I think less, but I'm sort of agnostic about that. But then there's also this more important question of like, okay, clearly some cooperation on AI is a good thing. Clearly, like we want someone who's more competent at regulating AI. And that I think the Democrats are clearly better on. So if you're sort of agnostic about the ideological question, the Democrats are just this, Pareto improvement. They're competent. The Republicans are not competent.
I think you should probably be looking at the California law because the companies that really have the horsepower to do the big AI stuff, they're out here in California. And I don't know, Zvi has talked about this. Has talked about the bill that they just. I think they passed it. Has it been signed into law already? I forget what we are in the progression of it. But I think that's that's probably where you're going to get something. Yeah, I don't think. I mean, I think this stuff is going to move too fast for the federal government to do all that much. I'm not confident that they'll be doing much regulating anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's moving fast to some degree. I still think having.
I mean, the other thing is if AI ushers in a utopia. Right, you 1 in 10 the Republicans because they have faster economic growth and they don't regulate AI. Okay, you have a 1 in 10,000 extra chance of having utopia and solving all our problems.
Yeah, okay. but I mean, I think if you get utopia, utopia lasts a long time, right? The promise of AI is that like it matters more that we make sure that AI doesn't kill us before we get to utopia than that we get to it a little bit faster because utopia lasts a really long time.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, you're assuming, it's like a very sort of narrow path to like think, oh, AI might kill us, but if we do a little bit more things, we might get to utopia. I don't know. I think that we're probably headed to utopia or headed towards doom, and like it's just going to be one of those things. I mean, I don't think we're going to finesse it where we're going to be like, oh, we're going to avoid doom by 5 years and make utopia instead. I don't know.
I think probably. It's probably whether AI kills us or like solve our problem. It's unlikely to be hugely affected by the Republicans versus Democrats. But I mean, I think even a fairly small risk. Remember 1 in 1,000 is like you get more, 8 million.
You get more. You get more variation in the Republican outcome.
I mean, this is just one thing where I think like it's just alarming to have this sort of unstable guy. We just want someone sort of competent regulating all these things. Not just.
I mean, Kamala's not very smart. I'm sorry to explain to you, but she's not smart. She's not as crazy as him. She'll do what her advisors say, but
I think she's pretty smart.
I saw a clip, and I have to check to see whether this is real, but I think it's real. She said 200 million people died of COVID. She said it twice, and that's not a slip up you make if you're.
Okay.
She failed the bar exam. I don't want to be one of these rightoids who's like, oh, Kamala has a low IQ, but I do think that they're probably right.
Yeah.
I think failing the bar exam is not something smart people tend to do. I watch her speak. I like her. I like her as a person. I don't think she doesn't strike me as particularly brilliant.
I don't know. I mean, right. So I think she's pretty smart, but I mean, more important than just like raw IQ is she sort of, she's likely to appoint.
She's not as crazy. Yeah.
Right. She's not going to appoint some random retard into heading AI policy who doesn't know anything about AI and is just a friend of Trump's. Right. She's not going to do anything like that. I think similar points to what we were talking about AI also apply to emerging risks from biotechnology. The sorts of things that might start pandemics. I think the Democrats are even more clearly better on that. That depends a lot more on international cooperation. There's much less of a scenario where it's about who gets it first. It's not like China gets it first. And it's bad
I don't
for us.
know. I see right wingers more afraid of gain of function research than Democrats are. It was sort of part of the idea that, they were hiding the lab leak. There was this idea that the media wouldn't talk about it. And the people who became obsessed with lab leak have been talking a lot about gain of function research. I don't know.
Yeah, but I think gain of function, it's a pretty expansive term, right? We don't want to ban all gain of function research, I think. I was reading an article about this a while back, right? And I think, figuring out at the margin what types of biotechnology are ideal and what types of them have greater pandemic risk. These are things that I think rely on competency that I'd expect the Democrats to be better on.
What about human enhancement? I mean, this is a case for you, but this is a case I would make for you. Basically, genetic engineering, embryo selection.
Yeah, true.
Democrats are obviously much better on this, and the judiciary is going to matter for all these things.
Yeah, I agree.
Existential? I mean, maybe. I don't know.
I mean, having smart people making decisions is important.
Yeah, smart people overall is important. Yeah, and so biotech is going to probably matter for that in the long run.
Yeah. One last question, and then maybe we can wrap up. You've said that if the Democrats were good on MAID, that we're good on allowing people to kill themselves.
Yeah.
Then you'd vote for Kamala.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to me, it seems like a lot of the things that the Democrats are better on are just more important than MAID. And I agree with you that allowing people.
I think the amount of suffering in the world due to people living too long is probably massive. I mean, I think it's one of those things that's really. I mean, I've known people who've family or friends of family who are they spend 10 years hooked up to a tube, 20 years not knowing what's going on, miserable all the time, just hating their lives to the extent that they understand. I mean,
it's serious. Most of those people are not going to commit suicide.
I mean, a lot of them probably, if you had a very liberal, the kind of regime I want, would be look, if I can't give consent, kill me, because that's it. That's a sign, err on the side of killing me. If I could say that, I bet a lot of people would do that. I bet a good portion of the public would write something like that. And if it was enforceable, not like your uncle could come and sue and say, oh no, you have to go through procedures and make it very difficult for the doctors and such. I think we would end a lot of that suffering. Yeah, in Canada, they keep the anti-MAID people keep talking about how many. And even that one is not as libertarian as I would like, but it's 5% of Canadian deaths in some provinces, and the right-ords are oh no, that's terrible. It's it shows how much of a demand there was. A lot of people don't want to be freaking living, you lunatics. And it's an individual rights issue, and then it's a human suffering issue. So it's not I'm not a one issue voter, but
you're a one issue voter on being anti-pro-life. Right,
yes.
You're on abortion and MAID. Yeah.
I'm not a one issue voter, but it's a kind of. I mean, they are better. I mean, they're going to appoint judges who are more likely to do good things on this. But it would be one of those things that could tip the balance.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think right. Yeah, that's true. But I mean, I see I think a 20% difference in PEPFAR funding between Republicans and Democrats seems like a reasonable estimate of what the expected difference would be, especially because in the last years there's been a much more major push because
why have we been? I don't look at this, but why have we been funding Africa AIDS and they can't fund themselves if it's the return is this huge, right? They've had 25 years.
I mean, they're Africa's,
they're poor.
Yeah, they're poor.
How much is this program? How much is the U.S. giving a year?
I don't know exactly. Not that much. I think a few billion.
I mean,
I think if you had tens of billions or something.
Yeah,
But
there's a lot of charity. There's a lot of. I mean, look, you could get one EA guy. Look,
But I mean,
write
look,
an article.
so-
You could probably get one guy on your who reads your Substack to probably fund it. If you could probably 1 billion. I don't know, 1 billion.
Yeah, I
but
mean,
you could get a bunch of people to put a bunch of money towards this.
yeah, I mean, look, uh, the right. So it saved about 25 million lives, and the Republicans have made efforts to cut it that have been amplified in the last few years. Right. I mean, you ask sort of like why isn't there more funding for it from other people? I don't know. I mean, there isn't that. People don't care that much about international development programs, and they don't fund them as much as they should. It's a shame, but it's a fact of the world. There was something else that you said that I was going to respond to, but now I can't remember what it is.
Okay.
All right. On that inspiring note, Richard and Hanania, thank you. I guess we should end the recording.